Let me reintroduce myself. I'm Max Spindler. During the latter part of World War II, when the Germans still occupied Germany, they were hunting down Jews to send them to extermination camps in Poland and in Germany. My parents were taken away from me. I was put into hiding. The Catholic Church are the ones that put myself and my brother in hiding. My brother was only 9 months old when he was put into hiding. He nearly died. I found out subsequently because I'd forgotten that I had a brother. For myself, I was in orphanages, Catholic orphanages run by nuns. What we did is learn a lot about religion, Catholic orthodoxy, and I had totally forgotten what my parents looked like. By the time the war ended, I was not aware that the war had ended. I didn't know what was going on. It's like I was in a world that was totally isolated. I had seen some soldiers come into the courtyard of the last Catholic orphanage I was in, and they didn't bother. They didn't bother me. I do not know if they were German soldiers or American soldiers or British soldiers. I don't know. I was totally innocuous as to what was going on. Basically, I was a mental case. I did miss my parents, even though I didn't remember them. I knew that I was Jewish after the war, and I was going to be baptized on my 10th birthday. Now, my 10th birthday would have been December of 48, which is 3 years after the end of the war. But for some reason or other, they did not baptize me. I did not know what was going on in the background, but someone was looking for me. That someone was my father's best friend. And my father's best friend had made a compact with others from the same town from which they came in Poland. There were a lot of workers in Belgium that came from Poland. Belgium was, prior to the war, was doing relatively well and needed workers. So my father and mother, at that time they were not married because they met in Belgium, but they came separately to Belgium. They met there and got married, and then there was me. And there was me in 1938 before the beginning of the war. So going back to where I was never baptized. I was staunchly somewhat religious, to put it mildly. One one of the reasons is that the Catholic Church provided me with everything. But the orphanage that we're in were not just for orphans. They were called orphanages, but they were helping Belgian families with their children in case the men could not provide. And during the war, while I was in those orphanages, they shuttled me back between orphanages. And I do not know the exact reason for this moving from one orphanage to another, but I speculate that it is to avoid capture by the Nazis in case they came in and checked. No one ever, quote, took down my pants and tried to find out if I was Jewish. No, you got to understand that unlike in the United States, circumcision was very rare among the Belgians. Basically only Jews and a few people who were concerned for health reason or otherwise were circumcised. And therefore it was easy to identify somebody Jewish by just checking to see if they were circumcised or not. Then they can find out beyond that if they were really Jewish or they did it for health reasons. It's kind of mandatory among Jews that at 8 days old, they circumcise the boys. Okay, and there's usually a big ceremony about that, family ceremony. My understanding is among Muslims they do it at age 12, which is a lot more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But Jews do it at 8 days old. So I did find out eventually, but that was already after the war, that I was circumcised. Prior to that, I would not have known what circumcision is, except that somehow after the war, you know, we went to the bathroom. They were open bathroom, urinals. The urinals were like long urinals. All the boys would just stand in front of the urinals and urinate. And at that time, sometimes if you look one way or the other, you notice there are differences. And that may be the reason why I was moved frequently, because somebody could identify me. Okay. Any rate, by the last orphanage that I was in, I went back and visited, and that was the building I was in. And let me point out, this is now closed when I went back in 1998. Okay, so that was, I left the place there in 39, I mean in 49. So that's almost 50 years, later that I visited the place. This was a doorway, and over here you had a wooden building that was added. At the top of that wooden structure there was a room, and this was our bathroom. one of the bathrooms of the dormitory. The courtyard had its own facilities on the outside, and it is here that whenever a fight erupted amongst the kids, they would put me here in the center of the courtyard, and the Flemish-speaking people in Belgium would not speak with the French-speaking people in Belgium. They have resolved some issues right now, but they are still somewhat at odds. The French or the Walloons, as they call them, are kind of hesitant to speak Flemish. And the Flemish had to learn French. So there was resentment between those people. I did not know that there was that much resentment. I didn't have any family connections. You know, you learn a lot of things through family connections. All of those boys that were with me, as far as I know, had family connections, come visited the. They had somebody come and visit them. I was the only one that did not have any visitors on visitor day. Now, they would put me in the center here. The bathrooms were someplace off to the side here in front of us. Cannot see it. And they put me there, and if a Flemish boy who was, the Flemish were placed here for some reason, the French were always here for some reason, I do not know why, and they wouldn't speak to one another. So they put me in the center to translate. Why was I put to translate? Because I didn't either identify as a Walloon or as a Flem, okay? It didn't mean anything to me. I had no inculcation from family as to what is the difference between them. I spoke both languages. There it is. What's the big deal? Okay? But without family history, without... so it wasn't that they picked on me because I was Jewish. It's because I did not express any interest in their little petty nonsense. And I was always in that position as neither French or Walloon, or neither Walloon nor Flemish. And I was comfortable in both languages. There are actually three languages. There are officially in Belgium three languages, three official languages, and that's French, Flemish, and German. There's only a very small section of Belgium where they speak German. That's near another country, which right now the name escapes me, but that's right next to Belgium also, between Belgium and Germany. But the fourth language, which is not really a language, it's a dialect. However, and that is the Walloon dialect. And it is a lot different than standard French. So somebody who speaks French and knows only correct French would not understand Walloon. And somebody who only spoke Walloons and had never learned French would not understand French. So in essence, it's another language, but they have the roots in commonality. If you listen very carefully, you can, you kind of got to slow down your brain process. You can see some commonality in words. But that's neither near nor there. So I spoke both Walloons, Flemish, and French. And when we came back, I visited that school. Now, if you can go to the next slide. In 1947, in December of 1947, I had visitors. This was the first time since I'd been in the orphanages that I was told I'm going to have visitors, or that I had visitors. And I was told beforehand, but I wasn't told who the visitors would be. They just told me I will have visitors. I was excited, I was wondering, I was hoping it would be my parents, not knowing what happened to them. For some reason or other, communications was really poor. I do not know why. The nurses were, I'm saying nurses, I'm talking about the sisters of the orphanage, were relatively terse. Here in America, we are much more, or comparatively to that time, we were much more free to communicate than with one another as well as with authorities than in Belgium. In Belgium, it was a one-way deal to my recollection. It was the nuns speaking to us, or the priests who came and spoke to us. Life was kind of different in the orphanages. So I couldn't ask anyone, who is it? I did ask. They didn't know. It was all, it was all like an authoritarian system, which that's what the orphanage ran on. They tell an underling, go tell them they're going to have visitors, and that's it. The nun would not question her superior. And that's the environment I was brought in. So I was told I was going to have a visitor. I didn't know who it was. And then when I was brought into the office, they introduced me, the nuns introduced me to 3 people. One of them was an elderly lady and her husband. And they told me, then the nuns said, this is Mrs. Marie Abras and Mr. Joseph Abras. And that young boy, it looks like a girl, but I will explain that later. That young boy is your brother. Now, I totally forgotten that I had a brother, because my only memory of the possibility of a brother is when we were in hiding in a room where all activities were taking place. There was a little crib in a corner of one of the rooms with a baby in it crying. Remember, he was 9 months old when we were taken away. And my parents arguing over something. I myself was scared. I remember that. The baby crying and my parents arguing. And that's the last memory and the only memory I had of my parents, but not what they looked like, just that they were arguing. And I conjecture that that was the last day that we were in hiding, because the people who came and got my brother and I from the underground, Belgian underground, came the next day. So after that, I have no memory. I don't even have a memory of them coming. I was just told by the lady that was involved with these transfers of children from families to hiding that she was involved. Okay, so that was my brother, and the reason why he's wearing long hair, and he had a big curl at the top of his head that went, a single curl that went from the back all the way to the front. That was the style at the time. For myself, I'm wearing a hand-me-down coat. It looks like it might be a girl's coat, but when you wear what you are given, that's what it is. It's not like you go to the store with your parents and you are asked to help select. Okay, next slide. This is when we went back. I think that was in 57. This is Madame Abras, the lady who took in my brother, and her husband, Joseph Abras. They had a beautiful home. I think I told you at a time that when they took off, and they told me the story when we visited a number of years later, after this was done. But she told me the story that when she took in my brother, he was 18 months old and he was dying. Mm. And she had to feed him with an eyedropper. And they had gotten eggs, and she mixed the yolks and whites, and then would just feed him with an eyedropper. And those eggs she had to get at the farm of one of her relatives, because eggs were not available to be bought. They were only bought on the black market. And if the Germans caught you with eggs, you'd be in big trouble. What she was doing was illegal because she was saving a Jewish child. But somehow or other, they called them, the church allowed Gérard, my brother Gérard, to be called Gérard Abras, and nobody was the wiser for it. All right, next slide. Again, that's my brother and I. So that's December of 1947. You can go to the next one. Okay. So that was in 47 when I met. I was 9, Gérard was 5, and I visited with my brother in Namur, the home with the Abrases, and in 1948 I visited again with Gérard for several weeks in summer, and that was the summer where Gérard was going to introduce me to some of the things that he was doing because he was familiar with the farm. And he brought me into the cow field, and he was going to show me some cows grazing and stuff like that. And if you remember, at that point, a bull came charging at us. My brother started to run, and I ran after him. I didn't know what was going on. And he started to climb the fence, but couldn't make it, so I pushed him over the fence, and then I got myself over the fence, and we were saved from whatever the bull was going to do. We were admonished not to ever go into that field without permission. In other words, making sure the bull was secured. Anyway, go ahead. This is the Pouponnière nursery or the nursery where Mrs. Abras used to work, and she was the nutritionist. Okay. Again, this I took years later when I went and visited back. That was already I think in 1998, when I was trying to reconstruct what had happened to me. All right, next. Again, this is the Abrasos. Next. All right. So in 1949, so it's quite a few years after the war, I had not yet been baptized. My 10th birthday had come and gone. No baptism. Didn't understand why. But in 1949, I had a person that was my father's best friend who had made a compact with the other Jewish people from the town that they came from in Poland, that whoever would be left alive would make sure that the Jewish children would go back into a Jewish environment. And he was released from the I think it was Auschwitz. For some reason or other, he was in Auschwitz, unlike my father. But he was released, and from 1945, once he got back on his feet, he started to search for us. Somehow or other, he located us, and the church was not willing to give him up because he was not a blood relative. And they went for the legalisms. I don't know what all the legal issues are, but in the United States also you can't just pick up a child or asked to be its guardian unless you happen to be a blood relative. Then it's a lot easier to become a guardian or even adopt. Anyway, he was getting nowhere, and in 1949, I was age 10 and a half. My brother was 6 and a half. He arranged with the Abrasos, because he had now found out that we were staying at the Abrasos, he had arranged for us to be kidnapped. And the way he arranged it is, on the Sunday that he kidnapped us, we were walking in the middle of the road towards a park, about 2 or 3 blocks away. He had arranged with the Abrasos that he would come in a taxi, which in those days were black. And the time was all set. We were to walk, instead of going to church, which was our wont when I was at the Abrasos, we would walk towards the park, and she had told us that a man would come in a car, didn't say taxi or anything. The man would come and would identify himself as our Uncle Maurice. And that's what I knew him by, Uncle Maurice. So he picked us up, put us in the taxi. We were not scared because we were told to go with him. All right, so next slide. This is the Peretz Club. You don't know what Peretz is, but Peretz was a famous Jewish author in Yiddish. And supposedly these gentlemen were supposed to study the literature of Peretz and other Jewish authors. You know, you've heard of some of them already, like Shalom Aleichem is another one of those contemporaries of Peretz. And they produce great literature. Unfortunately, a lot of it is in Yiddish, and very few people can read Yiddish these days. So, this was the Peretz Club. But, no, stay there, go back.
Sorry.
This is my father, and that is Uncle Maurice. So that was taken in Brzezzew, Poland, before the war. And this gentleman here is my Uncle Sal. He subsequently married my aunt. He was not an uncle at the time. He was just another person living in the town. And the Peretz Club was really a card club. They didn't do any literature reading. But it's a good subterfuge. Okay, you can go on. Uncle Maurice brought us to a Jewish orphanage in Antwerp, and this picture was taken a number of months before we left the Jewish orphanage in Antwerp. This is my brother. And I am here. All right. And we were in our best clothing, and this navy outfit apparently was very popular as for a well-dressed boy. And he had brought that from the Abrasos. Okay, continue. And that's a close-up of that picture. I'm there in the center. Okay, continue. And my brother again. Notice that we are with girls. And there was no problem. We ate with the girls at the tables, and we saw girls every day in the Jewish orphanage, but of course they had separate rooms than we did, and probably were separated additionally. But this was unusual for me because it's the first time that we could talk with the adult supervisors. They were like family. And that was a new world for me, an experience of freedom from a very restricted environment in the Catholic orphanages to the Jewish orphanage. And they didn't try to convert me from Catholicism to Judaism. They just practiced Judaism. And I had no problem whatsoever in just normalizing to being Jewish. They were not Orthodox Jews, so there was not the necessity of going to services every day or once a week. If you wanted to, you could. If you didn't, that's fine. They did not try to impose anything on you. As a matter of fact, I was told by one of my counselors, who I finally located here in the States, that we had a Jewish girl that, again, was saved as I was, but she would not give up her Catholicism, and they would take her to church every Sunday. They were very liberal about it. They did not try to impose anything on the girl. She was older than I was, that's all I know. What eventually happened to her, I don't know. Whether she migrated with us to Israel or not. But basically, in 1949, there was very little opportunity for Jews to reestablish themselves. So most of the Jewish people there migrated to Israel after the War of Independence. And I was in Israel for 3 years before an aunt, my father's sister, was able to bring me to live with them. She decided not to adopt me because she wanted to save my father's name. So, but for all practical purposes, I was like their child because they didn't have any children. Her husband was the gentleman I had shown you in the Parrots Club, my uncle. When I came to the airport here in the States, my uncle spoke with me, and he was so proud. I didn't know what was going on. He spoke to me in the Hebrew that he still remembered from Poland when he was himself a child and he had learned Hebrew, but he had learned Ashkenazic Hebrew, which is totally different than the modern Hebrew that I learned in Israel, which is Sephardi Hebrew. Sephardi Hebrew means Spanish Hebrew, and Ashkenazic means Germanic Hebrew. Because Ashkenaz was, in ancient days, in Hebrew, was Germany, or the area around there. There was no such thing as Germany, but there was that area. And that was Ashkenaz. So Ashkenaz Jews spoke a particular type of Hebrew. They all wrote it the same way. Okay? All wrote it the same way. We just read it differently and we talked it differently. So there was no communication between me and him. So once he took me to their home, I got to meet my aunt, my my father's sister, and they tried to decide how to communicate with me. They decided that probably with my parents I spoke Yiddish, because that was at that time the lingua franca of most of the European Jews. And Yiddish is about 35% Hebrew, Ashkenazic Hebrew, and the rest is made up of German, French, Russian, Polish, and other languages. There even are English words in there, in Yiddish. And they decided to go and teach me Yiddish first, as I could not communicate in any common language with them. And sure enough, within 2 weeks, I was able to understand and communicate with them. Apparently, their reasoning is that, yes, someplace in the back of my brain, there was the residual of Yiddish. So I can still speak kitchen Yiddish, you know, just your family Yiddish. Ability of up to that age, I was 10 when I came. So, I was 14 when I came, and I picked up some enough Yiddish that I could communicate with them. And once I was able to communicate with them, they said, "Okay, Max, now you are going to learn English." And that's how I commenced learning English. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. Like I said, in '49 we migrated to Israel. We waited for one of the 3 ships that were transporting Jews from Europe. Basically, people that were unsettled, that couldn't make head or tail of their lives because of what happened to them. So Israel was willing to accept them. And we were among those people that came to Israel, and we left from Marseille, France, and went on the Galila to Israel. Okay, next. And that is a picture of us in Marseille. Apparently not the whole orphanage. And here I am. I should say that I always recognize myself by the big ears, but it looks like everybody there has got big ears. All right, next. This is my passport picture for 1949. Now, what is interesting about that is that I was able to get a passport to leave to go to Israel. What surprises me is that when I was brought to the Jewish orphanage, shortly thereafter, the priest came looking for us, and the orphanage put us in hiding, my brother and I, because, again, Maurice, my Uncle Maurice, we called him Uncle Maurice, my Uncle Maurice had no right, according to the church, to kidnap us and bring us into this environment. They had a responsibility for some reason. So we were put into the attic, and we stayed there all day and all night. And I do remember that the police and the priest went up the ladder to the attic, shone a light, because I remember seeing the light on the rafters. So we were not even registered in the school where we went in Anvers, in Antwerp. Okay, so next, that's, if you look at those two pictures, you will see the resemblance between my cousin, Rochla would be Rachel, but that's in Yiddish. That's my cousin Rachel, and me. She was taken, if you remember, she was taken in early by the Nazis, and nobody knows what happened to her. Probably extermination camp. Okay? And again, that's the picture that you've seen before, the Jewish orphanage. Most, but not all of these people went to Israel. Some stayed in Belgium. Most of them stayed in Belgium. One of my friends that was with me in Israel went back to Belgium, and in order to get Belgian citizenship, he went into the army in Belgium and received his Belgian citizenship. Now, the reason we were not Belgian citizens is because Belgium at the time had a rule that in order to be a Belgian citizen, not only did you have to be born in Belgium, but one of your parents had to be a Belgian citizen. And since both of my parents went for Poland, there was no way that they could have gotten Belgian citizenship. Okay, next. Again, that's the people that saved my brother, and I communicated with them for many, many years until they passed away. This is the lady and that saved, that took us into hiding.
That's the last one. Oh, okay. We almost done.
She lived to be over 100 years old, and she was showing me the notebook that the underground used in order to register us, where we were placed, where we were, and it took 5 notebooks in order to completely identify a child. So this way, if one of them were captured, it would not reveal who the children were. If you go ahead, okay. I thought the next slide was the picture that shows how we were registered in that one notebook, but it doesn't. This is my friend that from the orphanage when I visited Belgium again in Brussels. This is Gilbert. He's the one that went back and got his Belgian citizenship. The middle one is myself, and the one with the yellow shirt is my brother. So even though he's younger than I am, he looks a little bit older for some reason. He got married younger than I was. That may be the explanation. Okay, next, is that it?
That was it.
Okay, if you have any question, if you want to know what happened to me when I came to the States, I'll be glad to talk about it. Any interested?
How did you get to the States from Israel?
The International Red Cross tried to reunite families. They had the so-called family reunification program, which they still do. Okay, they located an aunt of ours in Israel who had gone to Israel while it was still under British mandate. So she had gone, I think, in that time, British mandate Palestine in 36. And she, again from Poland, had first migrated to Belgium. My aunt Mina told me there's a story that she was a runner-up to Miss Belgium. I don't know, I never tried to follow up on the story. But anyway, she migrated to Israel in 36, and they reunited myself with her. They reunited her with Maurice, even though he was not family, because there was a network of trying to locate people from your town to see who survived and whatnot. And they reunited them, or reconnected them with the two other surviving sisters. So my parents had 10, my parents had 10 family, 10 children, of which only 3 girls survived the war. And 2 of the aunts that survived the war survived because they were picked up by the Russians and sent to a Russian gulag. Somehow or other, they managed to survive the gulag, and sometime during the war, because of the US-Russian treaties, if you remember, the United States was transporting through the Pacific arms to Russia to fight the Nazis. And they had made some treaties as to how the Russians were going to treat the Polish captives. And the Polish captives were my aunts. So they were released into the economy from the gulags. And in 1946, when Stalin allowed the repatriation of Poles from the Soviet Union into Poland, he was trying to sway the elections. So he released a whole bunch of Poles to go to Poland, hoping they would vote communist. When my aunts came back to Poland, to their hometown, or were going to go to their hometown, they were told that if they wanted to see the sun rise the next morning, they better be on a train to Germany, to a DP camp, but they were not welcome in Poland. So they left for Germany. And again, what is the attraction of Israel? That's the only country that wanted them. Even the United States had a problem with wanting Jewish people to come in. You had to have a sponsorship and whatnot, whereas Israel did not ask. You want to come? Come. Or we would like you to come. They invited them wherever they could find them. So that's how I got reunited. The 3 sisters got back together, and somehow or other Maurice told them about me, again, all through letter writing, and that's how I got connected to my aunts here in the States. And one of them, living in Brooklyn, New York, brought me to stay with them. And then I remember one of the first English words that I learned, because my aunt was speaking to me. I didn't understand what she was saying, but she was saying scholarship. And I remembered that word for some reason or other, scholarship. Hey, I just finished in Israel 3rd grade, and I was, that's in 1953, I was almost 14 years old, and I just finished 3rd grade in Israel. Because every time that I moved from one orphanage to another, different system, I had to relearn everything. And when I went to the Jewish orphanage in the Jewish orphanage in Antwerp, they put me in 1st grade again. And I think I told you the story that in proper French, which was the language of instruction in both at the Jewish orphanage and in Ostend, in proper French, the way you say 70 and 90, for 70 you say 60, 10, and for 90 you say 80, 10. So all those words were not familiar to me, because in Belgian French, not proper French, but in Belgian French, you say, for 70, you say 70, 70, not 70. And therefore, 71 would be 60, 11. Okay? 71, 71 for 62, for 72. And I was not aware of that. So, even in Belgium, in the Jewish orphanage, we learned proper French, Parisian French. In the Ostend orphanage, we learned Belgian French, which is slightly different. I mean, except for numbers and a few other things, they are pretty much interchangeable. So they wanted to promote me to 3rd grade. So the math teacher came and asked me questions. And they asked me how much was 70 something plus something else, to start off the conversation. And I look her in the face, and she repeats the question. I look her in the face again. What is she talking about? I've never heard this 60, 13 or whatever the number was, 73 plus 90 something. I mean, what is 60, 13